Hey, good morning. Scott Luton, Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Greg, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing quite well, Scott. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Great week. And, we've been looking forward to this live stream. We've got quite a discussion teed up with a power duo of industry leaders. They're helping organizations and supply chains optimize their performances, even in historically challenging years like 2020. You ready?
I am ready. We just dropped the episode with the boss, not to give it away,
right
today. Right. So I'm interested to see what these two have had. We've had some great conversations with folks from this company, and they are clearly paving the way, right?
So, on the move.
How about that? How about that for a setup? What do you think?
Well, Greg, I surprised you a little bit here because that episode you're talking about, we have included a video and audio links to that in the show notes. So we'll touch on that. We'll touch on that a little bit further in the episode.
Okay.
But hey, Greg, as always, if folks enjoyed this live stream, and they are, we're partial, but they're going to enjoy this one. But if you want more, be sure to check us out wherever you get your podcast from. Just search for Supply Chain Now and subscribe so you don't miss a single thing like this conversation today, right?
And YouTube.
We're
going back to the old days where I go and YouTube.
That's right. Those were the good old days. We'll be back too. We'll be back in studio before you know it.
Right? Yeah.
That's right. Well, before we bring on our guests here today, let's say hello to some of the folks that have already showed up. Pratik is with us. Pratik, really appreciate your comments you put on our post yesterday. About some of the rankings we've been made aware of. So really appreciate you being a part of these live streams, and thanks so much for being here today.
He'd be in Atlanta if it weren't for COVID.
Really?
Right? Yeah. I mean, he's coming to do studies at Georgia Tech. So he owes me Indian food. I think I picked the restaurant and he pays, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I love that arrangement. Okay.
I hope so. Right. I hope I remember that. Right.
Mina is here via LinkedIn from Egypt. Great to have you here with us. Nanda is here as well via LinkedIn. Great to see you here. Mike Avra. Hey, Mike. Really appreciate you joining us. Enjoyed the article you passed along earlier this week. Daria Patel is with us as well. Great to have you as always, Daria. He and Pratik and Mike, they're part of the best, most well-informed, sharpest community in supply chain. All right, they always show up and they always bring it. Right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and not just here, right? We get a lot of feedback and insight from them. A lot on LinkedIn.
They keep us on our toes.
Everyone.
Sure.
Yeah.
Gary Smith, great to have you here with us. Looking forward to your appearance on This Week in Business History right around the corner. Sylvia Judy, you couldn't do a live stream without our dear friend Sylvia. Great to see you. Of course, Clay and Amanda are behind the scenes making it happen as always. Appreciate that. Larry Klein from Albany, Georgia.
Very good, right. Scott. Well said.
Marie Hurst, trying to stay warm. Great to have you with us here, Marie, as always. Keith Duckworth, our resident, is it Michigander?
Yeah, that's right, Michigander.
Michigander. Okay. All right. Keep me straight. But Keith says, while Florida may bear the title of peninsula state, Michigan is the only state consisting of two peninsulas, upper and lower.
That's right.
And go ahead.
I saw an Adirondack chair that is the state of the mitten. It is the shape of the mitten part of the state of Michigan. It is one of the coolest looking Adirondack chairs. I can just see that around a fire up on the peninsula.
Love it. Love it.
UP.
Hey, it's not a live stream unless we mention Adirondack chairs, right? Tom, great to have you with us. Really enjoyed your new podcast, Climate 21, and thanks for joining us here today. One last one here, David from Nigeria. David, great to have you here via LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so let's, with no further ado, again, to our audience, I think y'all are going to get a kick out of this conversation. We've got two of our favorite people doing big things across industry. And let's go ahead and welcome them in. Polly Mitchell-Guthrie, VP Industry Outreach and Thought Leadership, and her colleague, Patrick Van Hole, Industry Thought Leader, both with Kinaxis. Hey, good afternoon, Polly and Patrick.
Hey, guys. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you.
And good morning from Scottsdale.
Yeah, that's
Good
right.
morning.
It's still morning for you. That's right.
That's right.
What's the temperature like there, Polly? Just let us all.
High today of 66, and that's a cool day.
Yeah, that is cool.
Love it, man.
I think it's going to be 75 later this week.
This is when everyone starts coming down from the northern states to visit.
Yep.
Right. I hope you have an extra bedroom.
Well, we got so much to talk about with you both. And Greg, we're going to dive in and get to know him a little bit better before the lightning round, right?
Yeah, let's do that. So who should we start with? Polly, let's start with you. So tell us a little bit about you, maybe a little bit about your personal life. Any epiphanal moments or anything like that, and a little bit about, what you do for a living today.
All right. Let's see. I'll start off with one of my favorite lines that I know Scott likes, which is that I'm Polly from Raleigh. So I'm originally from Raleigh, North Carolina, but I live in Scottsdale, Arizona now. Couldn't find a place to rhyme with Scottsdale, or didn't want to change my name for that matter.
Right.
But I live in the desert. Love the desert, even though I'm a Southerner. I love my biscuits. And 3 things about me. So let's see. I work. I've got a long history in analytics, and I tend to see supply chain really as a big analytics problem. And so I'm working in supply chain for about 1.5 years now. Love it because it's all kinds of analytics problems to solve. I've been very involved in 2 communities over the years, in addition to charitable work, but 2 communities, Informs, the Institute for Operations Research and Management Science, and Women in Machine Learning and Data Science. I'm proud to say I helped co-found the 3rd chapter, and there's now over 100 around the world.
Wow.
And let's see, and I love to hike.
So you're an OG then in Women in Data Science. You're one of the original gangsters.
Well, I'll take that. I've been at it for a while, and it's, yeah.
So
there's
we
others
moved
at
to
it a lot
Georgia.
longer.
For everyone who doesn't know, we moved to Georgia from Arizona. So Polly and she keeps me tuned in to what's going on out west, where it's warm. All right, Patrick, let's talk to you.
I get to follow that.
People might know you because you've got a series of kind of shorts that you do to share intellect around supply chain, and even this locale looks familiar to me. So other than that, tell us a little bit about you, and then what you are doing today.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I'm a bit of a supply chain geek. I love it. I see everything as a supply chain. My wife thinks I'm absolutely a geek, though, because I'll walk into a store and start counting piles of T-shirts and things. But yeah, I kind of grew up as an engineer, a degree by engineering, and then I've worked for a lot of companies as a practitioner: Dell, Rio Tinto, Apple, CVS Health. So that was the first half of my career. Second half, I've been a thought leader, and I was really fortunate to learn at the hands of mentors like Matt Davis and Kevin O'Mara, and on my way to Kinaxis. So certainly love being a part of this, and being able to work from home here in Rhode Island and be around my family. It's a balance, best of both worlds type of thing.
Very cool. Where'd you cross paths with Kevin O'Mara?
So I was at SCN World when Kevin was content officer. So yeah, Matt brought me into that group. They're both now at Amazon, and still keep in touch with those guys, but it was a lot of fun learning from them.
Yeah, outstanding. Well, both of you have been practitioners and now solution providers, right? So
yeah,
I'm interested, and we'll get to that. But I think that makes a really interesting perspective when you talk about perspective on the supply chain market. And my wife can empathize with yours, because when I go into a grocery store, I face the counters, make sure all the packaging is out in front of the shelf.
And that's awful nice of you. I used to do that. My first job was stocking at Winn-Dixie. That's where I got my first supply chain lesson, and straightening those aisles were important. So Greg, you got the grocery retail workforce that really appreciate what you do.
Yeah, I'm saving them 2-3 seconds a day.
Actually, last weekend I was in Target, and I noticed that something had been moved out of its section, and we walked by and actually replaced it, knowing how difficult it is to find that inventory once it's out of its home location. So
cross-filling is a crime. That's the first rule of retail. That's right.
All right. we are illustrating just how much the four of us, perhaps, I'm going to include you in supply chain nerds that we all are. But hey,
Definitely.
that's why we love what we do. There's so much passion,
Yeah.
and there's so many great people that are keeping the world moving forward, that are involved in across the world supply chain. So we're grateful for all of that. Let's say hello, Sophia. Great to have you here. Lisa, great to have you here. And Larry says his wife's from Prescott, Arizona. I'm not sure how far that is away from you,
Right.
Polly, but you never know. Hey, you learn something new every day. All right. So,
Is how they pronounce it up
Prescott.
there. And they judge you if you don't say it right. So
wow, okay. I had no
you learned
idea.
that the hard way.
That's right. Kind of like Beaufort versus Beaufort.
Right.
Ah, okay.
That's correct.
All right. So now before we start talking the hard stuff and 2020, getting some of y'all's key observations from this year, we're going to bring you both through the lightning round, right? So for starters, and we're just going to keep getting to know y'all a little better here. And we appreciate you being willing to entertain these questions. So Polly, I'm going to start with you, and then Patrick, will go to you next. But first up, what is one famous food dish in your family during Thanksgiving, and who makes it, Polly?
All right, so I'm going to merge. Traditions have to start somewhere. So
Right.
I've long made cardamom buns, which are these kind of sweet yeasty rolls full of cardamom, the spice.
Yep.
And this year we decided, I was like looking at, should I make cranberry curd tart or pumpkin pie? And we were like, you know what? We love cardamom buns. Let's just make it a Thanksgiving tradition. So we have a new Thanksgiving tradition birth this year. Long tradition cardamom buns, new for Thanksgiving.
Ah,
They're fabulous.
Love it, man. Making me hungry.
I don't even know what cardamom is. I've heard of it in like Pirates of the
You need to
Caribbean
check
or
it out.
something.
One of my favorite spices. Yeah,
Really?
good stuff.
I'm sure I've had it.
It's in the Indian food. Pratik could, I'm sure, help you find some
Okay.
cardamom.
Okay.
All right. So Patrick, what about you?
I'm going to go back to when I was a kid. My mom's from Australia, and her go-to dessert that we would have for holidays was it's called pavlova. So it's this meringue, crusty meringue. Even came on its own. She would make it on this plate that had the recipe on it, and it's been a long time since I've had that, but that's the one that comes top of mind. That holidays, special occasions, whenever she broke out the pavlova, it was a good day.
Love that. It's so neat how food can just take you back to different things, different memories, and especially Thanksgiving, we don't have to worry about any gifts, right? It's all about food and family and rekindling some of that. So appreciate you both sharing. Okay, moving right along, because we got a lot of good stuff to talk about. What's one hobby or habit that you picked up in 2020 and you're actually glad you have, Polly?
So I've been a long-time yoga practitioner, but this year I've moved my practice more at home. So I've been doing videos with Yoga with Adrian. Shout out to that. Great show if anybody's checked her out on YouTube. But love doing my yoga at home these days.
Love that. Okay,
Awesome.
Patrick, what about you?
I'm going to go similar vein. Is that early on when the first lockdown started hitting, my wife and I invested in basically taking my half of the garage, not hers, and turning it into a home gym. So, I mean, we've got barbells and weight plates and all sorts of things in there. And so it's a bit of a sanctuary. It's nice to just be able to roll out of bed and go do that every morning.
Love that. Okay, man, both of y'all making me feel bad about my lack of exercise routine. So I have to work on that after today's live stream. Greg, I'm going to ask you the same question. What's one thing you've done in 2020, new habit that you're glad you picked up?
I think you asked me this once before, and I had it top of mind. Right now, I would say, one of the things that I do is I frequently get out of the office, which is very rare for me. If anyone has ever worked with me at any of my companies, I'm like heads down in the office, on a plane, on the way to work or back. But I've done a good job of what is often a problem for people, which is interacting with the family during the workday. So I've kind of made it part of the routine.
Love that. Okay, so one final question for you both, and Polly, will start with you. If we were to poll your immediate family members and figure out what they've heard you say 1,000 or 1,000,000 times, what would be the number one consensus answer?
Well, I'll have to have Patrick do a sanity check on what I say at work, but I asked at home and I was told that I say a lot, you're probably right. Although the suggestion was given that if I said you're definitely right, that would be an improvement.
Nice.
I like that
I
one.
like that. I like that. All
You're
right, so
probably right. Does leave the opening that you could be wrong, right? Why do I think, Paulie? You're probably right, but
Yeah.
in there.
all right. So
I like
Patrick,
qualifiers, you know.
Yeah.
we do too. Same question, Patrick. What have folks heard you say a million times?
You know, I've got an 8-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and everything they do is because of the other person. So the big thing I've been harping on them is their behavior is their own responsibility, and they hate it. They don't like it when I say that.
They'll never forget it, though. I'll tell you.
Let's
right.
hope so.
Yeah.
All right. So really quick before, I appreciate both of y'all sharing and again, being good sports there. Gary Smith says, and I should have known this, that straightening of shelves were called blocking. I knew that once upon a time. And he was also a stock person, as was Keith Duckworth, who worked at a grocery store, night stock clerk in Kalamazoo, which Patrick, you're also a fellow Michigander, I believe, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Plymouth, just east of Ann Arbor.
Okay, love it. All right, folks, enough fun. No more fun the rest of the hour. We got to get to work. So, Greg, we're going to be diving into 2020, right?
So I think Gary's statement is a good indication of some of the issues. Actually, some of the issues we've actually talked about with supply chain is that there isn't a universal term for a lot of things because we called it facing. Now, I work for Kmart, which was also in Michigan, 3100 West Big Beaver Road, and not that we were there a lot. And so I think that's something we've got to resolve. All right, let's get to some really important takeaways for 2020. Besides the fact that we found out that there are a lot of terms for a lot of things. So, Paulie, give us some idea. I just can't wait to hear this. Let's keep it to the business thing. But of course, if there's anything else that you've found out in 2020, please share it with us. Any major takeaways that we could all benefit from, because it's been, as Scott says 1,000 times, an historically challenging year. So what do you got?
So I've got two related things. One is that I've been thinking about how, this is inspired a little bit by a comment Yossi Sheffi made at a conference I was at earlier this week. Yossi Sheffi from MIT.
Right. And
he pointed out that he thinks that even though there have been these headlines about the failures of supply chains, that this has been supply chain's finest hour. And so what I've been thinking about is that we're all too aware of the challenges we faced in our personal and our professional lives. But I think that humans and supply chains have shown themselves this year to be far more resilient than any of us ever expected we could be. Now, that doesn't mean we're not feeling worn thin by that. Again, personally and professionally, there's all kinds of discussion about the need for supply chains to invest in more resilience in order to figure out how to be stronger and weather the disruptions that we know are coming better. But I still think overall, when I think about one of our customers, for example, who's with a pharmaceutical company that makes drugs for rare diseases, Ipsen, and their goal for this year was to have no stockouts. And imagine maintaining that goal during a disruption. And they, with one exception that was sort of an exceptional exception, they achieved that goal. And so I think that's a great testament to the resilience of supply chains, that in spite of all that we've faced, we've been able to weather the storms remarkably well.
Polly, that's a great point, because the couple of items that in industries or sectors that have a hard time keeping stuff on the shelf, of course, that gets all the attention. But what doesn't is all these other global supply chains that have kept moving, to your point. And that's a lot of good news here.
Right. And I think a lot of people who don't know supply chain think of supply chain, like you say, as from their retail perspective, from what I did or did not find at the grocery store when I went to the grocery store. But, there's automotive companies, there's pharmaceutical companies, there's, commercial aircraft companies, there are, high-tech companies, all of these. I was talking to a semiconductor company, and they saw demand drop, and then they saw it take off because as we're all working from home, the need for chips has gone through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And they have been struggling to keep up with demand, but have done a remarkable job. And so, again, I think the story that's untold is how well we've all done in spite of it.
Hey, love that. I know you got one more. I want to share this exchange from the comments here. So Tom says, hey, what's another term for supply chain? Wrong answers only. David says complaint division. Sophia says magic. Can we call it magic? And Tom says, hey, it's supposed to be wrong answers only. Sophia. Love that.
Love those. Those are awesome.
I was going to say duct tape and diving catches.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's great.
All right. So that was one key observation here from 2020, Polly. What else is on your mind?
So that's the commonality, and the difference I'll say is that I've been thinking about, it's funny, I was thinking about this quote anyhow, and then Yossi Sheffi quoted it. The quote some people may know from Anna Karenina from Tolstoy, that happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And so what made me think about that is the fact that while there are commonalities across supply chains, there's such differences too. And back to the point about what do we call it, facing or restocking, like nobody lives in a generic common supply chain. People live in a pharmaceutical supply chain or a automotive supply chain or a semiconductor supply chain. And so the differences have been stark. If you're in pharma or grocery, you've probably had pretty good demand and interest in what you do. If you're in commercial aircraft, not as much. Apparel, not as much. And then is it a trick question I use when I lecture to students is what's been harder in the pandemic? Is it demand or supply? And it really depends on what industry you're in. And so I think the fact that the differences across supply chains are strong and have been really reflected in this time is also an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, great point. Greg, before we switch over to Patrick, what's what are some things you heard Polly say there?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the important things that she talked about is agility and resilience. And it's funny because I couldn't help but do it, was kind of harken back to the discussion with John, your CEO. And he has a particular irritation with what he calls this obsession with accuracy, trying to forecast everything precisely and to the exclusion of agility or managing the intricacies of the movement of goods, not just the prediction of demand. And if 2020 creates any kind of takeaway, I can see that you guys all see that. And I think I've had that same irritation, which is why it kind of struck me so much, is people think of what demand planning, forecasting, whatever, they think of inventory planning as forecasting. And that's really just a small portion of it, because as the great Fred Tolbert, the Doc Holliday of supply chain, says, there's only two kinds of forecasts, lucky and wrong.
That's right.
And that's why resiliency is such an important part of it. So I really, kind of echo what you're saying, Paulie.
All right. So hang on one second before we move forward. I want to share a couple of things here from the audience really quick. And by the way, you said Fred Tolbert without saying Huey. Greg, that's illegal. You got to fit in Huey to that reference. So back to wrong answers for what supply chain is. T Squared says miracle makers, miracle worker, and operational logistics stepchild. He says absolutely the wrong damned answer. That's a 3-syllable, I think. Love that. Daniel, and hello, Daniel. And by the way, hello, T Squared, says nice supply chain now. Come for supply chain info. Leave with extra knowledge on classic Russian literature.
Right.
I love that.
That's right.
And then finally, I think Larry's talking about how supply chain's tasked with doing stuff like eating soup with a fork. And I think we can all relate to that. So, all right. So, Greg, let's keep driving with Patrick.
Yeah, Patrick, tell us what has struck you this year and what will you take away from that?
Well, I'm gonna play off of both what you and Polly had said, and just the fact that everything is so much more interconnected than we've ever even known. The big thing, one of the things I put in my video earlier in the year was the fact that commercial air traffic being down had a monumental impact on air freight. I had no idea why. Taking a quick look into that, you realize that it used to be that 50% or more of global air supply chain was on commercial airliners.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you stop flying planes, and guess what? All the air freight goes away, the market changes. How do you plan for that? Like, that's not something you can really think about. So you talk about not being able to forecast accurately. Well, who's running the scenario that says that all of a sudden we're going to stop flying planes?
Yeah.
You know, so it's a tough thing to really put all of that together. The other thing I'd say is that there's more supply chains out there now than ever. I mean, I keep telling people that, you know, we just had a Whole Foods delivery this morning. That's a supply chain. Amazon comes to my house more times than I want to admit. That's the local supply chain. Like, every single one of these things is a supply chain. When we talk to academic groups and we talk to anybody that'll listen, that all of these things are new ways into supply chain, and people are learning about the movement of goods and products and services in ways that they've never thought about before. And it's, you know, being a supply chain geek, like I said, I see it that way. But it's funny when you look at someone and say, okay, you know, you ordered Chick-fil-A and it showed up at your door. Well, how'd that happen? And how'd they know to deliver that? And it's not just an app, and it's not just the guy, it's how you put it together in a platform, and then you track it all the way back. So it's just a really interesting time for all of that, because it's the way that it's been done before. It's not, you know, I'm a big believer that transformation is not doing things better. It's about actually reinventing it, and we're seeing it happen. So it's a pretty cool time. It's a little scary because you don't know what it is, and you kind of have to explain it as you go. You know, it's building the plane while you're flying it, but it's a really interesting time.
Yeah, and I think we've seen some significant disruptions that we didn't expect. And to Paulie's point, supply chains, or I guess we should say to Yossi's point, supply chains didn't fail, but the failure points in them were significantly exposed by such a dramatic change in the supply chain, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think just the fact that, Patrick, think about this, when, you know, at the beginning of this year, you couldn't sit around with your family at the Thanksgiving table and say, I'm in supply chain, and have anybody have the slightest damned idea what you did, right?
Yeah.
So that is a huge takeaway. When consumers, as I say, the most impactful on the supply chain, the consumers, and the least educated on the supply chain, politicians, know what supply chain is about, then you know that times have changed.
Right. Good point.
Definitely.
All right. So I'm going to share a few observations from 2020 from the audience here before we are breaking out some crystal balls. Marie Hurst says 2020 is going to teach companies that they need to rethink business continuity planning for the unexpected in big ways, not just as a tabletop exercise that gets rubber stamped. Completely agree there. Mike Aver says that the Wall Street Journal, back to air freight, had an article a few weeks ago about airlines transporting live animals in retrofitted aircraft where passengers used to sit. And Tom says gives a whole new meaning to cattle class.
Quite visual.
Going back to something Gary Smith mentioned, and Gary wrote a great recent article in Supply Chain Management Review a few weeks ago. It says adaptability equals resiliency plus agility. I like that definition there. But, you know, speaking of resilience, which you can't have a supply chain conversation, you know, without that coming out in spades. I like, Greg, earlier this year, I think Jeff Cashman or Cindy Lago flipped it, and they said, you know, rather than think so much about resilience, think about the opposite of resilience, the antonym, which is fragility. Right. And if we all started really embracing that and really getting a stark assessment of our supply chains in terms of how fragile they are versus resilient, I wonder how that would change certain conversations at leadership levels, Greg.
I think if there's a single recognition that we've had this year, it is that I'm so glad that John said this obsession with accuracy, and that supply chain is a cost reduction exercise. Those two things have been laid bare. And the truth is, we have to acknowledge that supply chain is, in every aspect, it's a risk management exercise. Those risks might be excessive costs, and they might be inaccurate predictions, but in any case, what you're trying to do in every aspect of supply chain is to mitigate, offset, and prevent risk.
Yeah, good point. Before I recognize a few more comments, Polly or Patrick, would one of y'all want to weigh in on what we're talking about here?
Well, I'm just going to go really quick. There's a quote that I saw this morning from Target CEO Brian Cornell. You're talking about not being a cost reduction exercise. They spent $4 billion over the last 3 years in making their stores a fulfillment node in their network.
Yeah.
So look at how well they're doing. Look at what they're able to do in COVID, in the pandemic, because of the money they spent over the last 3 years. That's $4 billion.
Yeah.
Wow. And Polly, any quick comment there?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, I'm more of a glass half full kind of gal in the first place, but hard times expose our weaknesses for sure. But again, I think that those weaknesses give us a chance of what is it that we need to invest in and work on. And I think that's what we're going to see in 2021. I'm giving you a tip to where we could go next. But at the same time, I think we need to remember that the resilience is about plowing forward and continuing in spite of the challenges that come your way. And I just would reiterate that I think that's what we've all done. But figuring out where you can get better is absolutely where we need to head.
Great point.
I think that a lot of companies have done that really rapidly during this crisis. They got punched in the mouth, and they responded very quickly, and and changed things dramatically. And to your point, Patrick, 156% increase in e-commerce sales is what Target has absorbed with their incredible investment.
Right.
And this is what Patrick and I were actually talking about yesterday, talking about Whole Foods deliveries or any company's home delivery. So now we tolerate shortages or things that don't show up correctly in the cart. But that's because we're in a certain time where we know that that's the best you can get. But the competitive advantage is going to come from those companies that can use the supply chain to their advantage to show a difference in how they can deliver and customer service. Patrick was pointing this out. A lot of companies showing their emphasis on customer service as a way to say, we can get you because supply chain is all about getting the right thing to the right person at the right time. So if you get some of the right things to the right person at the right time, well, A plus now, but A plus won't be the grade a year from now.
Right.
Because people won't tolerate that.
I want to add to your quick list.
Convenience and quality. I mean, the scale, the balance between those has shifted recently.
Right.
Yeah.
I would add to that quick list you just shared, Polly, making smarter and quicker decisions, which I know Kinaxis really helps its organizations and clients that it serves. All right, I want to share a couple quick comments, and then Greg, we're going to get some of the bold predictions here.
Yeah,
so Daniel mentions about, he completely agrees with Marie's earlier point, but not only business continuity planning with their current operations, but going outside of the four walls with their suppliers. And this is something the Clorox company, dealing with historic demand, they pointed to as a big success for them to ramp up production as much as they have, getting with their suppliers and figuring out strengths or contingency planning, what have you. T Squared says 2020 forced companies to get inventive and flexible in ways unexpectedly expected. Good point there. Let's see. Mike Avery, UPS and FedEx are turning deliveries away to keep their operations flowing instead of overburdening and breaking their system. Daria says COVID-19 is a black swan event with a low disruption probability and severe consequences. Planning for resilience involves identifying and classifying risk. I know that's going to get Daniel's attention. Map out plausible scenarios and maybe performs drills. And to that point, one final comment Larry mentioned, talking about drills, should also practice some of those backup plans physically versus only virtually. That's an interesting comment there, Larry. All right. So, Greg, where are we going next?
Well, let's talk about those bold predictions. What do you say? Let's see what you see in 2021. So, Polly, I happen to know that you have a distinct advantage in seeing into the future. So maybe you can share with us.
Well, as you said earlier, the only fun thing about making predictions at this point is that the landscape is so topsy-turvy that we can make them and who cares, because we'll probably all be wrong. But one thing I think we can say with certainty is that the next year will be predictably unpredictable. So we don't know more than we would have said a year ago. We don't know what 2021 will bring. We just know that it will bring different things that we might have thought a year from now. So my bold prediction is that as important as agility is, because if you have a perfect plan and you're settling on trying to get the perfect plan, well, good for you. At a point in time, you have the perfect plan. And then what happens that next moment in time? Your plan is out of date already, and your data's out, or if your plan was even perfect in the first place, and it probably wasn't, it was probably operating off of stale data. But my prediction is that in the effort so again, I said I was glass half full. So while the forecast may always be wrong, how can we get it righter? That's a technical term, a righter forecast.
I like that.
So how can we get the forecast to be more accurate? And so if we can combine agility with better accuracy, then we're in better shape. So I'm going to predict that machine learning, and I prefer the term machine learning to AI, because I think AI is a big fancy term, but really the focus is on the methods, and underneath the covers are primarily machine learning. But I think machine learning is going to see a greater takeoff this year than we could have even expected, because as we know that demand is unpredictable, we're going to be looking for anything we can do to even get a little better, righter forecast. And so if demand sensing and other techniques can give us a near-term horizon that's a little bit more accurate, and we can combine that with the agility to shift as we need to, then we're going to be in better shape.
Yeah. To quote the great philosopher Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
Right.
Only the classics here at Supply Chain.
And look, we all know, if any of us have ever done any kind of project, the first thing that changes after you create the plan is the plan.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what's the first thing you do after you finalize a plan? Is you change it. So classic. And I agree. I think we have to be a lot better at being righter, and we have to be a lot better at, as you said before, at being resilient. So Patrick, what do you see coming in 2021?
Well, one thing, on the Mike Tyson quote, I was giving an academic presentation 2 weeks ago, and I dropped that quote in, and I realized that most of the people didn't know who Mike Tyson was. So I had to explain who Mike Tyson was. That was an awkward moment. But in any event,
how does that happen?
Yeah. It was awkward, like I said.
Yeah.
The thing I'm going to say is that the COVID-19 vaccines are going to be the most important product launches of our generation. It's not all that bold, but we need to consider them like new product introductions. And if you think about all the struggles that happen with an Apple product launch or a PS5 or whatever those things that we're seeing, all those struggles, that it's going to happen. It's not going to go well. And I know that that's, I'm taking the flip side, the half empty side from Polly, but there's a lot of hope riding on this thing. And so we need to figure out how to do this, because it's going to fundamentally change our lives. And there's a lot personally and mentally invested from people that if it doesn't go well, that it's going to be devastating perhaps. And if it goes really well, all of a sudden, like, the gates are open. People's behavior are going to go off the map. So, the predictably unpredictable side of things is that if all of a sudden COVID's gone 6 months from now, can you tell me how crazy people will be? And that's the thing that's actually going to create a whole lot of turmoil beyond what we've seen already, is that we're in for things that we don't even know are coming.
Yeah. I'm looking to buy a sailboat, and I'm going to wait until there's a vaccine, because I have a feeling that prices are going to plummet because you can't find one now. But no, you're right, Patrick. And I think we're already starting to see that. First of all, we've got at least 3 vaccines, and they're all using different distribution methodologies, right? One is using their own, and they are foregoing their usual distribution network. Hadn't really thought of it that way. But the others are going to be more deployed in the traditional sense. And now the UK has sounded off and said, hey, we want first dibs on that vaccine, right?
Well,
so that sort of thing is going to complicate things, undoubtedly. And then, as you said, there are people just sitting there going, they're making their plans as if they had won the lottery, right? Mm-hmm. What if COVID goes away? I'm buying a triple wide trailer. So
all these people that have been working nonstop from home.
Right.
Yeah. Housing prices have gone up. Like, what's to stop them from just selling their house and traveling around the world when all the gates are open, when restrictions are gone?
We just got to figure out how to make sure Greg is wired wherever he sells, and we'll be good to go.
I'm working on it.
Speaking of the Mike Tyson reference, I use the word Reader's Digest all the time, which, believe it or not, still exists. And folks look at me all the time and have no idea what that is. Wheaties is another one. Wheaties, my kids, what is that? Anyway, let me share a couple of comments here from the audience, and we'll have a few extra minutes here. Bonus time, Polly and Patrick.
All right.
So Sylvia says, our dear friend Sylvia, based in Charleston, the Holy City, I believe. Amen, Greg. I'm seeing a complete paradigm shift in all of the verticals and supply chain management. 12 months ago, major OEMs and retailers only focused on cost reduction in the supply chain. Today, they pay tenfold to bring goods to the consumer without a squabble. Well, how about that?
Good.
Keith Duckworth says, hey, something all military veterans can understand about planning. There isn't such a thing as a perfect plan. Once the bullets start flying, you might as well chuck that plan out the window. Agreed. Great point there. Sophia says, some companies are focusing on not trying to get the forecast better, but to test scenarios of wrong forecasts. All right, so Polly and Patrick, y'all both shook your head there. What would you add to Sophia's feedback? And Polly, let's start with you.
Well, certainly scenario planning, we're big advocates of that at Kinaxis. It's a great way to figure out, given that the forecast is never going to get you all the way there, it's that combination of agility and accuracy. So let's look at all the possibilities that we can imagine of what could happen. Things go really well, things don't go well, and all the gradations in between. And then we can plan for those, and we can know what the impact will be across our entire supply chain, not just, on material, but end to end. And then we can be prepared. We've got one customer that has literally 1,200 scenarios on the shelf that they have looked at everything that could happen, and then so they're ready. They've got something they can draw on when that scenario happens or something approximating it. It's a good way to be prepared, and it's a good way to think about when your forecast is wrong and not righter. What are you going to do in that event?
Love that, and I bet it goes from completely catastrophic in terms of destruction and disruptiveness to some of the smaller wrinkles. And by the way, one of the latest Big Four studies says we can expect major disruption like we've seen here in 2020 every 3.7 years. Wow. Look forward to that. All right. So Patrick, any additional comments there when we talk about scenario and planning and whatnot?
One of the big pushbacks on scenarios that people will say is you can never scenario out everything. And that's true, but you can also segment your scenarios and say, okay, I think the comment was made earlier. What's your likelihood? What's your impact? What do we think is going to happen? And so, maybe you're bucketizing 4 scenarios, the high impact, high likelihood, what are we going to do? Where are we going to break? Ultimately, we need to figure out where we're going to break. There's that fragility exercise that's important. And I would say also from a personal standpoint, as human beings, we kind of need to know those things too. Like what's going to scare us? What are we prepared to deal with as individuals, as employees, all of that. And sometimes it's just a matter of kind of categorizing our thoughts in a scenario and giving ourselves a sense of direction, because we know that no matter what we're planning, it's going to change. So don't try to solve everything, but definitely give yourself a chance to take some action, because the last thing you can do with a pandemic, with dealing with kids, with dealing with dogs, whatever, is do nothing. You got to have a sense of direction of what you're going to do when you have that moment. That goes back to the agility piece as well.
Great point. Hey, here's a great comment from the audience. All these have been great comments, but this is a great one here from Basim. This live streaming emphasizes what Professor Richard Wilding says, quote, I think we'll see some big changes such as procurement for resilience rather than cost. How about that? In fact, speaking of that point, that's been one of the reasons out of several why we haven't seen this massive shift from China in terms of production and sourcing, because they have largely been able to with the exception of a month and a half, 2 months, keep things moving and contain things and offer that certainty.
Right. I just want to give a shout out. Richard Wilding's a great guy. I was on the phone with him just a couple of weeks ago. He's a great thinker and really talks about the temple of supply chain resilience and how in order to build your resilience, you have to have visibility and agility built in there. So he's talking about all those. But I think one of the things I'll also highlight as part of that is that this whole notion that we're going to reshore because cost is because we don't care just about cost anymore, is too simplistic an argument, right? So there's a lot of reasons why we have these long, complex value chains around the world, and cost is only one of those factors.
Yeah.
And so when you look at all those factors, and again, that's why you do scenarios. You look at all the factors, for example, when you're considering sourcing and figuring out what matters to you, what's going to change when you change your suppliers. So resilience is absolutely going to continue to be a dominant factor in the coming year.
Greg, can we get a hallelujah for what Polly just shared? Because she makes a great point that we've been talking about forever. It's not as simple as let's bring stuff back to the States. You can't just do that without disrupting so much. And to Polly's point, price is just one of the things. So excellent.
Capacity is the biggest. I mean, price isn't even the biggest issue. The price of labor isn't even going to matter, because the labor force that traditionally has manually produced goods or has participated in the physical production of goods is exiting the workforce at a rate higher than it was in the past 2 years. 3.6 million more baby boomers have exited the workforce this year at this point than did last year at this same point. And before that, it was 10,000 a day. So we can't possibly duplicate the capacity of workforce. Virtually, you cannot combine the workforce of the world to duplicate the workforce of China, because they augment with robots as well as with physical labor.
Yeah.
So,
but the expertise is a lot more diffuse than people think. It's not. It's capacity. It's a workforce. It's a cost, but it's also expertise. So the example I've been giving lately is Harley Davidson motorcycles, which, for those of us who are Americans, and I'm conscious of the fact that we do work for a Canadian company, so we try to think globally, act locally. But Harley Davidson may seem like the iconic, quote, American company, and Harley Davidson motorcycles are manufactured in North America. But I don't remember exactly all the parts, but like they get brakes from, say, Austria and pistons from, say, Italy, and I may have the parts, the origin wrong, other electronic parts from Mexico and others from China. So pulling back from China is only going to solve one piece of that problem. There's specialization in each of those areas, and that's the iconic, American motorcycle. And it's not like getting our chips back from China. So this is it's a complex world out there, and we're not going to see any unraveling of that overnight.
Yep.
Well, and economics play a huge part in it as well. Are we really willing to pay the price? And experience says no. Even though 70% of people say they care about sustainability and sourcing and nation of origin and fair trade and human rights, only 10% of people actually act on that.
Yeah.
Good point.
We look at a company like Apple, for example, and they, their investments in their suppliers and, investing in their factories and then allowing them to lease them back and things like that. I mean, those are the types of investments that are required, is that somebody with a lot of cash has to go spend it to bring it back. And that's where it makes a difference.
So just as we expected for this conversation, one of our few predictions that has come has been accurate, has been more righter, Polly, is
very good.
Folks are enjoying this perspective, and we have lots of new deacons in the First Church of Polly and Patrick, as we knew we would be. So Daniel says, well said, Patrick Van Holt, new supply chains and new suppliers, lots riding on their success, but lots of challenges as well across the end-to-end supply chain. Larry says, amen. Procurement requires a worldwide view. Absolutely. Okay. And then the other
Can I
thing,
make a plug on that one, Scott?
Sure, please.
On that last comment. So one of the things, when I talked to Gartner about, I run our academic program, among other things. And so I think about the future talent, and this gets to your point, Greg, of all the people retiring, how are we going to replace them? Mm-hmm. And so companies are telling Gartner what they want out of their new supply chain talent is employees with a global view. So I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the person who just said procurement is global, we need to have a global view of our, Larry, thank you, Larry, our supply chains are global and complex, and we need to have employees who think on a global level, because I think our Harley Davidson motorcycles and everything else we can make, whether it be that whatever product we're making, it's going to continue to be a globally sourced product, and we need people who think globally.
Great point.
Yeah,
great point.
No doubt.
The other thing about when we're talking about new suppliers is in this environment, as we were talking about air travel earlier, Patrick, you can't put your engineering team and some of your ops folks on a plane to go check out and kick the tires in person of a new supplier, right? And so you've got to figure out a different way of oftentimes of building that trust, and that has certainly slowed down and has given many leadership teams pause in terms of finding new suppliers, whether it be it in China or whatever part of the world.
I guess my question for you on that, Scott, then would be, all of the existing relationships that have already been built, the collaboration that came out of those early months of COVID. I mean, we saw more collaboration early on. Would it cement those pieces more so, the people that already had those existing relationships? So there's some opportunity that's come from it. I mean, yes, you can't get on a plane, but you might be willing to give up a little bit of that control because you've worked with them in the past. Great point.
Yeah, relationships matter, and relationships matter perhaps more than ever before when we get to these. I forget. I try to coin new phrases to describe because they get so tired, right? It gets so, you hear historic, you hear all these things, but it's been comes from such the blindest of blind spots. Some of the things we've had to deal with here in 2020. A couple of comments here. Tom Rafter says, to Greg's point, sustainable products shouldn't cost more than their non-sustainable equivalents. In fact, they should cost less. If sustainability is working waste out of the supply chain, they should definitely have less waste and so cost less. And Greg, we talked a little bit earlier on the buzz from Monday how Newell was trying to find ways of designing more sustainable, right? Get it upstream so you don't have to worry about the recycling because it's not there, to Tom's point.
Yeah, that's right. And I just heard of a company yesterday who is recycling carbon fiber from airframes, and they're able to provide it at a third of the cost of new carbon fiber. They're reconstituting it into new pellets to be used in any kind of product, frankly. But that is sustainability right there.
Great point.
Yeah, sustainability is there's so many elements of that. I mean, if we have inefficient supply chains, which we do because we have so much immaturity in our supply chain, they're full of waste. And so that waste alone is costing us. And we need to see that as a cost and not what we perceive as a cost from perceived higher cost materials, for example, which is where people's heads go.
Great point.
But I like that point as well, that if we're also thinking about sustainability in terms of how do we get returns? How do we make money off our returns? It's possible to make money off your returns. It's also important to think about sustainability in terms of where we source. If we're sourcing rare materials that aren't going to last, we have to figure out how to make them last longer, and that's around making our supply chains more circular so that we're not having to continually rely on increasingly rare materials that's going to drive the prices up. We have to rethink our design from the get-go. So
you can't have agreed, a bird bath fountain that lasts about 3 weeks is what I found. We can't have stuff like that. It just leads to waste. Hey, I want to share this comment from Jamin, and then Greg, it's already 7 till. We got to make sure folks know how to connect with Patrick and Polly.
Just come here right now.
Jamin, who is officially certified by Guinness as the most positive individual on the face of the earth. And hello, Jamin.
His glass is all the way full.
That's right.
We need more.
So, Jamin says, early COVID time-driven collaboration is something we do not discuss enough, to Patrick's point, but I have it to be quite true and impactful. Excellent point, Jamin. Okay, let's just add another hour to this discussion, Polly and Patrick. It was as advertised as Greg and I thought it would be, and I really appreciate y'all's approach here. So let's make sure our audience knows how to connect with you each. And Polly, let's start with you.
Well, probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Like to use that as almost a sounding board, as a way to think. So come find me on LinkedIn, and we'd love to have a conversation. Patrick and I talk a lot about thinking about this notion of thought leadership as bidirectional. So we certainly think of thought leadership, which is what we're responsible for, as both sharing what we are seeing and hearing, but we can't share what we see and hear unless we hear from people and have those conversations. So love to hear from people. And this has been a great conversation to help us inform how we think and what people are thinking, even, agree, disagree, get it right or wrong or whatever. Let's keep talking.
Well said, Polly. Well said. Patrick?
What she said. Yeah, LinkedIn, username on that's P Van Hull. So you can just find me first initial, last name. And then certainly, engage with us. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, Polly and I have these conversations all the time. We're really fortunate to live in this environment. We have a lot of fun doing it. Interestingly enough, we've never actually met in person, by the way.
I would have never known.
Serious?
Yeah, I first talked to Patrick on the way home from my last trip.
Wow.
So
what a world, right?
Yeah. But yeah, we want to have these conversations, and certainly anybody that wants to have them. And we've been doing academic presentations and APICs and things like that, and informs. I mean, we're certainly happy to come talk to anybody and reach out. We want to continue the conversation here and anywhere else.
Outstanding. Well, to our audience, and Greg, I know you speak for you too. Polly always shares a lot of takes on different articles and developments, especially on LinkedIn. And Patrick, as you called out, Greg, I love the 2-minute videos. That's like the perfect length these days. So we have included their LinkedIn profiles because we're after offering one click to all of our audience members to find what they're looking for in the show notes. So you can check that out, connect with them. And like they said, they're both inviting continued conversation. Right, wrong, or indifferent, like Polly says, we got to have the conversation. So I love that. What a great point to wrap up today's conversation on. But really, Polly and Patrick, really enjoyed this. Greg, before we bid adieu, I speak a little French, to Polly and Patrick. Greg, what was your favorite thing that either Polly or Patrick shared here today?
There's so much. It's hard to really pin it down, but I think what really strikes me is the power of practitioners going into the solution business, and the power of people to both leverage their experience and to challenge that experience to think in new ways in the supply chain. That's a unique gift. I mean, we had that really strongly, and we worked really hard on it intentionally at Blue Ridge, but it's very uncommon, but you can see it from the top. Even Duncan Klett, who's still the founder of Kinaxis, who's still thinking in new ways, challenging his own previous thinking. To John, to Patrick and Polly, and the entire team that we've talked to, and regardless of whether that's a Kinaxis thing, which clearly it is, it's a cultural thing at Kinaxis. It's a good model to build any company by, whether it's a technology company, whether it's a practitioner, a retailer, a manufacturer, distributor, whatever it is to use your expertise, but constantly challenge that expertise. Ask yourself why all the time, and clearly they're doing that.
Yeah, great point. As Patrick says, transformation is not just doing things better; it's reinventing how they're done. That's a great point. And one other thing about what Ann shared, Ann Robinson shared, that supply chain is a keeper of the last touch. I love that phrase. It makes me think of the keeper of the planes, Greg. That's such a great way of looking at it. And now one of the silver linings is it's being appreciated and recognized, and consumers are more aware. And that's a great thing that comes out of 2020. Yeah. So we'll really appreciate you both. I love your POV here. Polly Mitchell-Guthrie and Patrick Manhold, both with Kinaxis. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're looking forward already to the next live stream.
Thanks so much, guys.
Let's do it.
Take care, y'all. Ready. Greg, man.
I so wanted to wave them out, but now you've got me thinking about waving on video, right? That's a no-no for some people.
So to the audience, we were talking on an earlier live stream. Greg and I both have realized that we're wavers, and we break the cardinal rule that you're not supposed to wave at the end of a Zoom call or maybe a live stream. But so Greg has tied both of his hands down, and I'm still the geek that waves and says hello and stuff. But that shouldn't surprise anybody. Greg's always the cool one. But great conversation here today. I mean, as advertised, I think,
right? I mean, we both have talked with both of them before, but surprising perspectives. And, it's a good reminder, as I said, if you are trying to conduct some kind of transformation, it's not just about the technology. We hear that all the time, but man, if they didn't enunciate that clearly, I don't know who could.
Yeah, well put. All right. Well, I was serious. I was ready to do a second hour with Patrick and Polly. It still seemed we were just scratching the surface, but we've gotten a lot of comments from the audience. Really appreciate all the great feedback. I agree. I'm partial, but I really appreciated how they approached that conversation. And one quick shout out, Demo Perez. Demo is going to be on an upcoming episode. We're excited to have him in a week or two, I believe. I'll double check that schedule. But Demo, hope this finds you well. And great to have you.
I hope he does his part from the Panama Canal. That's what if he can get out, that would be cool, wouldn't it?
That would be cool. Jamin says waving, visual fist bumps, or heck, even high fives, all acceptable in my book. It's 2020. The rules are out the window. Love that. All right. So Greg, great episode. To our audience, thanks so much. It is so rewarding to have these live streams and just the audience. They show up, the community shows up and brings it every single time. And that is one of the best things about this journey we're on. So
no doubt.
On that note, best wishes to you all. Hey, if you like these types of conversations, you can check us out at supplychainnow.com for a lot more. We're approaching about 1,000 episodes between podcasts, live streams, and webinars. You can't find all those there, but we're getting there. But most importantly, Greg,
oh wait, hold on, let me put down. When you said that, it made me thirsty, all that talking. Okay, do your thing, Scott.
Well, it's our thing. It's our thing. It comes from a very genuine spot, but we got to challenge our audience like we challenge our own team, right? Do good, give forward, be the change that's needed, be like Polly and Patrick. And on that note, we'll see you next time here at Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.